Intro. Beneath the city of Rome, there is a place that has never been fully opened to the public. A place where centuries of documents, relics, and records have been sealed away, some for decades, some for centuries. The Vatican Apostolic Archive. For most of recorded history, access was forbidden entirely, even to scholars, even to heads of state. It was not called the secret archive without reason. And what has been found inside, what has been slowly, carefully released over centuries, tells a story far older and far darker than the image of marble saints and gilded altars. This is not a story about religion. This is a story about power, about what institutions preserve, about what they bury, and about the weight of history that accumulates when an organization has operated continuously for over 2,000 years. Today, we go inside the Vatican's hidden layers, the documented records, the suppressed trials, the sealed rooms, and the chapters of history that were locked away until the world was ready to receive them, if it was ever ready at all. Section 1. The archive that wasn't supposed to exist. For most of its history, the Vatican Archive was known by a single Latin word, secretum, secret. Not secret in the modern conspiratorial sense. Secret in the medieval administrative sense, meaning private, reserved, set apart from the public record. But the effect was the same. For over 300 years, after the archive was formally established in 1612 under Pope Paul III, no outside scholar was permitted to enter. The records accumulated, the centuries passed, and the world on the outside could only speculate about what was held within those walls. Then, in 1881, Pope Leo III made a decision that stunned the Catholic world and the academic world in equal measure. He opened the archive to qualified researchers, slowly, partially, with restrictions. But the doors opened, and what scholars found inside was staggering, not because it confirmed dark rumors, but because the sheer volume of documented history was unlike anything previously accessible. Approximately 85 linear kilometers of shelving, over 35,000 volumes of papal registers alone, documents stretching back to the 8th century, letters from kings and emperors, records of excommunications, transcripts of trials that shaped the fate of nations. Henry VIII's request for the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, denied, triggering the English Reformation. That original petition is held in the archive, the handwriting of a king who would change the face of Western Christianity forever, preserved behind Vatican walls. Galileo Galilei's trial, documents from 1633, the complete record of how the Church condemned one of the greatest scientific minds in history for asserting that the Earth moved around the Sun. Those documents are here. And in 2020, after years of preparation, Pope Francis unsealed a further portion of the archive, the records of Pope Pius XV's papacy during World War II. Decades of debate, decades of questions about what the Vatican knew, when it knew it, and what it chose to do. The documents are still being examined, the history is still being written. Section 2. The trials held in shadow. The Vatican did not only preserve history, it adjudicated it. For centuries, the Holy See operated one of the most powerful legal and investigative bodies in the known world. The Roman Inquisition, formally established in 1542 by Pope Paul III. The name alone carries the weight of documented atrocity, but the full picture held within Vatican records is more complex and in some ways more disturbing than the simplified narrative taught in most classrooms. The Inquisition was not a single event. It was an institution, one that operated across different countries, under different names, with different degrees of severity, for nearly 3 centuries. The Spanish Inquisition, technically separate under the authority of the Spanish crown rather than Rome, became the most notorious. Established in 1478 under Ferdinand and Isabella, it processed tens of thousands of cases. Modern historical estimates, drawn from surviving tribunal records, suggest that between 3,000 and 5,000 individuals were executed over its entire duration. The suffering documented in those records is unambiguous, but what the Vatican's own records reveal, painstakingly analyzed by historians, including those given access after 1881, is that Rome frequently attempted to moderate the most extreme excesses of regional inquisitorial courts. Internal correspondence shows Vatican officials expressing concern about the reliability of confessions obtained under torture, about procedural irregularities, about tribunals that had become instruments of political vengeance more than theological correction. This is not exoneration. It is documentation of an institution aware of its own failures and incapable or unwilling to fully correct them. And then there are the individual cases. Giordano Bruno, philosopher, astronomer, former Dominican friar, burned at the Campo de' Fiori in Rome on February 17, 1600. His crime was not simply scientific heterodoxy. The Inquisition's charges against him included his belief in an infinite universe, in the plurality of worlds, in the transmigration of souls. He refused to recant. 8 years of trial, 8 years of imprisonment, and at the end, silence. His trial records remain incomplete. Some documents have never been located. Whether they were lost or whether they were removed is a question that Vatican archivists and historians have not been able to definitively resolve. The silence around Bruno is its own kind of document. Section 3. The Necropolis beneath St. Peter's. The secrets of the Vatican are not only written, some are buried. Directly beneath the Basilica of St. Peter, beneath the marble floors, the gilded altars, the tombs of popes, lies a city of the dead. The Vatican Necropolis, also known as the scavi, from the Italian word for excavations, this underground cemetery was discovered in the 1940s, when workers carrying out construction under Pope Pius XV broke through into a previously unknown chamber. What they found stopped the work entirely. A complete Roman-era necropolis, intact mausolea, frescoed walls, funeral urns, inscriptions in Latin and Greek, a layered burial ground stretching back to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. And at the center of it, beneath the high altar of one of the most significant churches in Christendom, a modest repository of bones. Bones that the Vatican, after decades of careful study, identified as the remains of the Apostle Peter himself. The excavations were conducted under extraordinary secrecy. The project, known as the Scavi di San Pietro, was not publicly announced for years. Results were suppressed within the Vatican itself, as competing factions of scholars debated the findings. In 1968, Pope Paul VI formally announced that the bones, identified through analysis as belonging to a robust, elderly man consistent with the historical description of Peter, had been found. The announcement was treated with widespread skepticism by independent archaeologists. The methodology of the original excavation was criticized as insufficiently rigorous by modern standards. The chain of custody for the bones had been broken at one point during the excavation, when a Vatican official had removed them from their niche for safekeeping without proper documentation. The necropolis itself is now accessible to small, reservation-only tours. Most of the surrounding excavation area remains closed. The full extent of what lies beneath St. Peter's Square has never been comprehensively mapped. Section 4. the library, and what survives. Separate from the archive, though often confused with it, is the Vatican Apostolic Library. Founded formally in 1475 under Pope Sixtus IV, it holds approximately 75,000 codices and manuscripts, over 1 million printed books, materials in dozens of languages spanning millennia of human record-keeping. Among its holdings are some of the oldest surviving manuscripts of the Christian Bible. The Codex Vaticanus, a Greek manuscript dated to the 4th century AD, considered one of the most important textual witnesses to the New Testament in existence. But the library's history is also the history of what was not preserved. The Library of Alexandria, perhaps the most famous lost repository of knowledge in human history, had no equivalent successor. When it burned, it took with it an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls, according to ancient sources. Works by Aristotle, mathematical treatises, medical texts, astronomical records, the accumulated knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean world. Some of that knowledge was partially preserved through Arabic translation traditions during the Islamic Golden Age, texts that eventually re-entered European scholarly circulation and influenced the Renaissance. The Vatican Library itself holds materials that survived the medieval period only because Vatican scriptoriums copied and preserved them when no other institution would. That act of preservation carries its own complexity. The same institutional power that destroyed records also saved them. The same system that silenced Bruno also maintained the Codex Vaticanus. History does not deal in clean heroes and villains. It deals in archives, in what survives, and in the questions that the surviving fragments cannot fully answer. Conclusion. The Vatican is the oldest continuously operating institution in the Western world. 2,000 years of correspondence, 2,000 years of decisions made in rooms where no cameras were present and no independent witnesses were permitted. The archive holds approximately 85 kilometers of shelving. Scholars estimate it would take a single researcher over 10,000 years to read every document held within it. Most of the world will never see those documents. Some of those documents have already deteriorated beyond recovery, despite ongoing preservation efforts using ultraviolet imaging and spectral analysis to recover faded texts. And some, a portion that archivists acknowledge but cannot fully quantify, were deliberately destroyed in periods of upheaval, conflict, or institutional crisis over the centuries. What was lost cannot be recovered. What survives is still being read. And between those two facts, between what remains and what is gone, lies the truest picture of an institution that has shaped the course of human civilization more than almost any other force in recorded history. The archive is open. The history is still incomplete. Subscribe. New dark history every week.